Alright, so in this video we're going to cover how to handle midterm upsells, downsells, and churn by building a screen flow automation in Salesforce to guide your users through this complex process. Before we actually get into the building of the screen flow, I'm just going to show you it working through each different scenario, and then I will show you how to actually build it by following the instructions that I have laid out here for every single element in this flow. I'm not going to cover everything because that'll take 2 hours, but if we just go over each element through one fork of this, you'll be able to do most of this on your own. So let's get into it. First, I'm just going to show you what happens when we trigger this flow. So the flow is triggered by an action. So you can set that action to be a button on a record. And when you click it, it passes the record ID from the page that you're on into the flow. And then here it gives a quick preview of what's happening with this current contract. So this is an active contract, started in February. There's roughly 4 months remaining in it. Select an action. So if we want to do an upsell, we're going to amend the contract to add additional products and services, and that's what this first action is going to do. If we want to do a downsell, we're going to apply a discount to the current subscription before the end of its end date. And churn would be if we want to cancel the contract midterm. We're going to start by doing an upsell to show you what happens. So first of all, the first thing you do is input an upsell date. So I'll just put today's date, which is October 30th. It's telling me that there's 3 months left in this term because the upsell wouldn't kick in to the 25th, which matches the start date of this contract. And say I want to add 3,000 or 1,000 in MRR, I would just put $3,000 because 3,000 divided by 3 is 1,000 in MRR. And if we click next, it will bring us all the way over to this upsell here. And if we go back to the active contract, you can see it linked in this amendment section. Now, if we were to mark this as closed won, you'll see that this is now getting marked as expansion revenue for October. And if we go back to that renewal, you'll see that the total amendment ARR has been changed to 12,000 because we just added 12,000 in ARR to this active contract, which means in the next renewal there's $24,000 up for renewal. So this renewal should actually be forecasting for 24,000 because that amendment just added on top of it. So that's how this upsell portion works. Now let's do downsells. So I'll pick another account here. Again, I'm just going to make this 12,000 to make it an even 1,000 MRR starting point here. Now let us do a downsell. So let's trigger the flow. We'll click downsell. And we are currently, let's say, looks like there's 2 months left in this contract. So say they want $500 off for the remaining 2 months. We'll put in 100, which is equivalent to 500 a month, which is showing that 500 a month discount is going to be applied. And if we like that, and that's just going to be for the next 2 months. Now we are on that renewal contract, which is representing a $500 a month downsell starting November 20th, ending January 19th. So that's just 2 months. This is the original record we were just on. You can see the amount has changed from 12,000 and the term from 12 to 10,010. That way the ARR and the MRR stay the same. It just means that the contract ended early and was cut off by this downsell here. And the other thing that happened is because this record was marked as closed won, it generates a new renewal to which we should set the amount to be equal to whatever the previous ARR for renewal was, which was 6,000 a year or 500 a month. So you can see that's how the downsells are being handled. Now finally, let's do churn. So let's pick one of these ones that is coming up. So here's one. So this one, let's mark this as churned. And again, I'm going to change it to 12,000 to start off with. Okay, so let's go ahead and mark this as churn. So if we go here, we select churn, and we have to enter the date the vendor will no longer use our service. So let's put today's date. Okay, so you can see this won't actually be effective until November 17th. I want to do something just so this will actually show up on our reporting as well. So if I move this back so it will show up for September. So let's say they churned on September 12th. That means their effective day was 17th, which is at the end of their subscription service for that period. that would mean they realized 2 months pre-termination, and we actually only ever got $2,000 from them instead of $12,000. And the churn record is now marked as closed lost for the amount of 12,000 ARR. That is now also moved to September, and you can see the original new booking. This has all been adjusted based on that churn, and you can also see this in our reports now as well. So if we go to revenue movement, you can now see that huge churn that happened, $12,000 ARR churn that happened in September. So that's how you do it. That is how you handle these different scenarios. There is lots of numbers moving around, and you basically just have to be aware of how you want to adjust these date fields and the amount fields, and make sure you're using effective dates that match the subscription start date, and everything should be handled pretty cleanly. If you want to go into the details for how this is built, the next section of this video is going to take you through how to build all of this stuff here. And I cover everything up to upsells. I'm not going to get into downsells or churn because it's just going to make the video too long. But this should just give you a full preview as how to actually do this yourself. So yeah, enjoy. Welcome back to the next video in the series. So in this video, we're going to cover screen flows and how to actually guide your users through midterm contract changes. So you can see here, I've put together a diagram at a high level of the flow we're going to be building. The user is going to click a button that lives on the opportunity object or the current active contract, and they will decide whether or not they want to do a midterm upsell, midterm downsell, or a churn midterm. So it's going to be complicated, and this is probably going to be a pretty long video because there's so many elements in this flow. But the main purpose of this is to really just guide the user through this and automatically set the data points, because otherwise they're just going to put the data in incorrectly, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So if we actually click into the flow here, you'll see that there's actually 19 different elements that are making this up, and I'll walk you through this one by one. The first step is just to get the base records and the renewal record, and then it's checking to see if the base contract is active or not. If it's not active, it's going to get you to restart, and then it's going to guide the user to decide what action they want to take. And then depending on which you select, it will either create a new record or update existing records accordingly. And as you go through this, you can click into each of these here, which will have the details as far as what to do. And I will walk through it with you. So let's get started. We're going to make a new flow. It's going to be called, it's set to be a screen flow. And we'll start with the get base opportunity element. So that is a get records element. And we're going to call it get base opportunity by ID. Ooh. You can use this API name here if you want for the opportunity object, and we're going to select all conditions that are required, and then set ID is equal to the record which started the flow. So in order to do this, we actually have to create a new variable called record ID. So if you go to resources, variable, call it record ID, set it to text, and set it to be available for input. And what this does is it will allow you to pass the ID of the record, which page you are currently on, and we'll be able to use that ID value to query for the opportunity record and all its associated fields. So we'll put that in here, and let's go ahead and move to the next step. So the next step is get renewal opportunity by renewed by, and this just gets the subsequent renewal opportunity of the base opportunity which you are currently on. So make a new get records element, copy this. Querying the same object, and we're going to set a filter for ID is equal to opportunity from get base opportunity by ID, and then we want renewed by, and that's it for this. Okay, so now the next element in the flow is a decision element, which is checking to see whether or not the contract is active. So if the current contract is active, or actually, first of all, let's create this element. So we're going to make it look like this. First outcome, contract active. And then we want this condition to be get base opportunity by ID contract status is going to be equal to active. So that's the first condition. And then the second condition we'll call contract not active. Okay, so we've created that element. Now let's go ahead and create our first screen element. So it's going to be contract not active. So you can open this up here, and we're going to be making a screen that looks like this. It's basically just telling the user that this process can only be triggered from an active contract opportunity, meaning they will have to exit this record and find a contract that is active. So let's make a new screen. We'll call it contract not active error, and then we'll give it this API name. And let's configure the header. So we don't want to show the header, so uncheck that. Configure the footer. We do want to show the footer. We want to use standard label. We want to hide previous, and we want to hide pause. That looks good. Now let's go ahead and bring in our display text component. So all we're going to do is copy the text from here and paste it. Looks like we might have to format it and give this an API name. So action required. Okay, so I'm just going to format this, and then let's make this bold and make this bold, and we will make this bold. Okay, this looks good. Save it. Okay, so that's the first fork in our flow. So we can actually add an end element here. And it looks like our flow is done on this particular fork, but we have to continue. So now we're going to go and build the action type input. And this is where the user is going to decide whether or not they want to do a upsell midterm, a downsell midterm, or a midterm churn. So we're going to make a new screen, and it's going to end up looking like this. So we're going to call it action type input, and we will do the same as we did in the previous to the header. So we'll remove it, and we'll show the footer. We will use the standard previous button and hide the pause button. Then we have to bring in our action type display text. So let's bring this over. Call it action type display, and let's paste this data in here. So it looks like we have to modify this to reference the namespace as we've been doing. You likely won't have to do this. Okay, so that worked for those particular resources that are being referenced. But we also have to reference here base opportunity remaining term. And this is based off a calculation field, which calculates the remaining term of the current active contract. And all it does is it is comparing today based on when the contract is supposed to end. So for this, we'll actually make a new resource here, and it's going to be a formula. and it will be of type number with 0 decimal places. And we can go ahead and just copy in the formula here and check the syntax. It wants the namespace prefix again, so we'll add that in and check the syntax. Okay, we're good. I'll call this done. Oh wait, we're not done yet. We need to add the next part of this here. So we have to add in a pick list component. Let's drag that in and we'll give it a name. So select an action type. You can call it action type pick list. It's required. The data type will be text, and then let's configure the choices. So we have to make choice resources. So the first one is just going to be called upsell. And you can just call it upsell for everything. Choice value, upsell. And then we have to make one for downsell. And we have to make one for churn. Okay. So we've now configured this part of the flow. So if we go back, you can see that we built this initial part of the flow, which is leading us to a fork. So let's save this for now. And let's call it midterm contract. I'll also put opportunity. Midterm opportunity contract change. We'll save it. And just for fun, let's just test this. So if we find an active contract, say this one here, it looks like this is active, so I'm going to copy this in. And if you go to click debug here, you can paste in the record ID to start with. So let me get that. Paste it in. Okay, so it looks like it's gotten the start date correctly, and it did not get this part of the field correct for some reason, so we'll have to fix that. And this is fine. And you'll notice that we went to here immediately because the contract was active. If we were to pick a non-active contract, so we were to pick, for example, this expired contract here. Let's try running this again. So it's saying that it can only be run from an active opportunity. So this part of the flow is working. What's not working is that display screen there. So we should actually come back here and edit this and figure out what went wrong with this contract end date display. I'll just insert it. If we go to records, contract end date, I mean, it looks exactly the same, so I'm not sure why it wasn't showing, but paste it in there. Let's save it. And let's try debugging once again with this active contract. Okay, so it's putting in the correct start date, end date, and the current time remaining in the contract. So this is just going to give the user a preview of the current contract so they know exactly where they currently stand. So today is October 30th, so we're 6 months into the contract, and that will tell the users that any of these changes that they apply are going to be for the duration of 6 months. So that's looking good. Let's come back to the flow and let's just continue building. So now let's proceed with the creation of the upsell, we need a the next decision element. So let's go ahead and make this decision element here. Call it action type selected. You can copy this API name. Call this first outcome upsell selected. And let's just set the resources. So it's coming from action type input, the pick list. And we want the result of that. If you look at this, action type pick list, we want the result of that to be the first choice, being upsell. And you can see in more detail where that's coming from, which is here. Now let's go and add the second choice, which is going to be downsell selected. Action type pick list is equal to downsell. And then lastly, the default outcome will just be churn selected. Okay, so now we have 3 new paths that we're going to go down. And we'll start by building out the upsell path. So let's start with a new screen called upsell screen. Let's open this up. And it's going to guide them to the creation of an upsell. So we're referencing initially a bunch of old fields from the existing contract, and then it's going to preview what the upsell will look like based off of the inputs that they put in. So let's start by just configuring this. So we'll remove the header and we will hide the pause button. And then we can go ahead and add our first display text component. So we'll just call it upsell display text, or date display text, doesn't really matter. Copy in all of this text here. And again, it's going to want me to put in the namespace prefix for a lot of these. So let's put this in. Oh, we don't need it on a mount actually. Okay, so this actually looks good. Cool. And everything came in bolded, which is nice. So this section is done. Now we have to bring in a date component. And this is going to be called upsell date. It's going to be required. And we'll also bring in a numeric component as well. So we will call this currency, and it will be total additional contract value. And what this represents is just how much revenue is being added on top of the upsell. So we'll require it and we'll give it 2 decimals, and we should be good here. Now we have to put in another text display component, and we will call it upsell amendment preview text. And the text we will just copy again from here. So upsell date is there. Upsell effective date is a new resource we have to create. So we're going to make a new formula called upsell effective date, which is just going to align the start of the upsell with the day of the original contract start date. That way the upsell is always calculated in terms of months rather than partial months. So this is going to be an output of a day, and say for example the contract originally started on the 2nd day of the month, but the upsell is happening on the 25th of the previous month. The upsell effective date will be the 2nd of the preceding month. So all we have to do, I have the formula here already, you can just bring it in. And we do have to provide it with a namespace prefix for some of these fields. Check the syntax here. Contract start date, oh yeah, right here. Okay, so that should be good. Now upsell term length, we have to make a formula for this. And this is just telling us how how much term is going to be added, or how long the upsell is going to be based on the upsell effective date. So this is going to be a number output with 0 decimals, and we can just copy this formula field in, and let's just add the namespace. Okay, that's working. And we have a couple more formulas here, so bear with me. We're going to put in upsell MRR, which is going to be a currency. It can have 2 decimals. Just copy and paste this resource in, which is just referencing the previous variables we just created. And let's go ahead and make upsell ARR. And for upsell ARR, we will again make it a currency output, and we'll 2 decimals, and we can just copy and paste this formula in. Looks good. Okay, so we've created that screen flow component. Let's continue with the upsell portion of this. And we have to actually now move forward with the creation of the upsell record. So we can open this up, and we have to add a create records element. So let's bring that over. And we will call it create upsell record. Okay. And it will be from the manual creation, from the opportunity object. And let's go ahead and start plugging away here. So account ID is going to be the base opportunity account ID. The amendment of, we actually are going to have to we actually can just refer this to the original base opportunity ID. And then let's put in amount. This is where we're going to reference the input from the user, which was their total upsell amount field. And then let's do close date. We also have contract start date. And we have term name oh, there's a lot. Okay. So contract start date and close date is going to be upsell effective date. Contract term is going to be upsell term length. And then we have, oh, this is saying renewal name. I'm going to call it upsell name, or we'll just call this name. And we'll make a new formula. This should not say renewal. That's an error. I'll fix that. But we will create a new resource here, which will be a formula. We'll call it upsell name text. And we can just copy this. Looks good. Okay, we got the upsell name. And now let's do record type, and we'll do stage. The stage we'll just put to the first stage, which in our case is needs analysis. It might be different for you. For the record type, you have to go to the opportunity object. You have to go to record types. You have to go to upsell, and you have to get the ID from here. And you can just hard code that in just like that. Okay. So that part of the flow is complete. I've added another section in this video, which is a navigation. This requires a bit of code so that it will navigate to the upsell record on creation. I'll put that in a bonus video at the end because it does require some programming. It's pretty basic, but I just want to leave this at as simple as possible. And all it does is it navigates to the record that you created, which just makes it kind of clean. But we can just add an end element here, and let's save this, and we'll test it. So let's actually input this value here and see if our flow is working properly. Okay, so this looks good, and then we're going to put in an upsell. All right, it's working now. So what you can see is if we were to create an upsell on today, there's 6 months left in the contract. So this upsell would go until the end of the contract, but it wouldn't be effective until October 23rd because that matches the start date of the contract by the number of months. And the amount of value, you can basically see that this would be 1,000 for the rest of the term. If you wanted it to be 1,000 a month, you can add 6,000 onto this. And you can see that that's adding 1,000 in MRR per month with a total value of 6,000. This preview calculator is just to help guide the user through the process of inputting the values here. So we can go ahead and say next. And if we actually go over to this account, there should be a renewal that was created. And you can see it's right here. It's related to this record. And if we were to close win this, that would trigger the flow to add the MRR to the total amount up for renewal in the other opportunity. But yeah, this amendment is now open, so it's not official until it's marked as closed won. So let's just do that. Okay, so now if you go back to this renewal, you can see the 12,000 in amendment ARR was added on top of this contract here. So if you were to go to this upcoming renewal, you'll see that the total amount up for renewal is 30,000 plus the additional amount that we just added. So that completes this part of the video, which is just showing how to handle the upsell creation. I'm going to pause this at this for now. Thank you.